Hi, my name is Delcy Stanishi with Cal Poly Pomona University in the Liberal Studies undergrad program. My research for my capstone is about how parents engage with their children to help develop speech. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, some children aren't meeting their speech development milestones. There has been an increase of cases needing children needing speech intervention and speech therapy. Even at my school, cases have been rising and they're looking to hire another speech pathologist. Sharing my screen right now. Okay, in a study that confirms similar results, here's a graph from a study done by a team of 6 researchers, some of them being Blaine Franklin, PT, Dave Little, MD and MS, and Eric Barkley, PhD. It shows that an increased amount of children with speech development delays since the pandemic started. Children who turned 2 years old between September 2020 and March 2023 were more likely to experience speech delays than those who turned 2 in earlier years. Those who turned 2 in the first quarter of 2023 were 87.8% more likely to have speech delay diagnosis. According to Executive Director of Charlotte Speech and Hearing Center, Shannon Tucker, believed that skyrocketing number of children with speech delays were caused from understimulation. During the pandemic, parents no longer took their children to story time in the library, no play dates, interacting with other children. No more trips to the public playground and no trips to the grocery store. So children had very social interactions and they saw less of children their own age. Also, with everyone wearing masks, children could not observe lip reading and watch mouth movement, which usually begins around 8 months of age. So when you're talking to a child, the baby will look at your mouth and observe how your mouth is moving. And so when you're wearing a mask, that doesn't happen. Speech delays in children can affect their reading skills in elementary and ultimately even high school graduation. So this goes back to the question, how can parents engage with their children to help develop speech? I'm going to share my screen again. Children exposure to sound and language start in the womb, according to Sonia and Aurelia's Elicon, 3 months before the baby is born. From there on, parents play a priority role on language exposure of their children. Introducing sounds through music, storytelling, conversation is the first step to developing the ability to distinguish between all the sounds. The more the child is exposed to sounds, the better they're able to reach their speech milestones. And a study done by Lindsay Zajac in 2019 showed that children placed in a loving and caring foster home achieve their speech development milestones on time. And children who are raised in maltreatment and neglectful homes are more likely to demonstrate deficits in early receptive language skills that negatively impact later academic achievement, social competence, and behavior adjustments, as initially studied in the 1970 case of Jeannie Wiley. The story of Jeannie Wiley from the 1970s is an example of how isolation can impair speech and language. Even after years of therapy, Jeannie's still unable to properly communicate because she could not um, comprehend the rules of grammar and apply them to speech. Dana Patetti, a professor of communication sciences, says that in her study, the frequency of book reading and storytelling activities and the number of books in the home contribute to the child's growth of language development. Exposure to language and sound is number one to help develop speech in the child. Reading is followed by closely. Reading can contribute to a child's speech and expose them to language. Reading can help the child associate the words to picture, as in the book Brown Bear, What Do You See by Bill Martin Jr. The repetition of words in the pictures help children associate the two. Sign language is next on the list. Teaching an infant sign language can kickstart speech development in the brain by helping the child form connections to communicate. Neuroscientist Laura Ann Petito studied how infants are keen to rhythmic patterns in both their mouth and their hands. For example, a baby babbles with its mouth and also its hands. As they move their mouth, they use their hands as a form of communication, like we do, like us adults do now. So sign language can promote early language development. It's easier for children to use their hands because the muscles aren't quite the connections to the muscles in the mouth aren't quite formed yet. 5 parents were interviewed in my methods of study, in which they were randomly selected from a pool of available applicants. To qualify, the participants had to be parents of at least one child, and from the ages of 21 years old to 45 years. They had to be able to remember the ages of the child at which they reached their milestones. They had to remember when their baby started babbling, when they started talking first word, two-word phrases, and sentences. I'm going to share the screen now. We're going to go to the next slide. The questions that I asked included: how many children do you have and what are their ages? How often did you play with your child? What did you and your child usually do during playtime? What were some of the things that you did that promoted your child's speech development? Did you try to teach your baby sign language? If yes, do you think that helped develop speech in your child? What do you think mostly impacted your child's speech development? Were you ever worried about your child's speech development? Is there anything you would like to add about your child's speech development? And lastly, when did your child start babbling, start saying one words, start saying two-word phrases, and finally speaking in sentences? So I put together a table to better see all the data that was gathered through the 5 interviews. As you can see here, we have 4 parents that had one child and one parent that had 2 children. And from the 2 children, I asked her, did you experience a difference of rate, that the child learned to speak? And she said, yes, the daughter learned to speak much sooner than the son. And doing further research, boys are quicker at learning gross motor skills, and girls are quicker to learn speech and cognitive development. And this one was about, how often they played, what kind of activities they did, including play with toys, say the colors, sing songs, dancing, a lot of play, which is good. We want to see that. We want to see parents interact with their children. And all 5 interviews, they did interact with their children and play with them. What are some things that you did that promoted your children's speech? Most of them said reading. And if they didn't say reading now, they said reading later in the interview, which played a big part in an image that we're about to see later on. And again, what impacted the child's speech development? A lot of them said reading, exposing them to the words and the images, helped them form the connections. All of the development stages were met from the 5 interviews that I had. All of them did speak and did babble at the appropriate ages, looking at the sources and looking at a textbook of children development. Um, yeah, so they all did really well raising their children into speaking. And lastly, I asked, were you ever worried? In only two interviews, they said they did worry at first, especially, the daughter speaking and the son taking a little longer. But towards the end, they all caught on to their milestones. At the end of the interviews, I created a word cloud of all the nouns and verbs that were used in the interviews. As you can see here, reading was the word that was used the most throughout the 5 interviews. Reading was the activity that was shared between all of them. Other words included books, play, talk, try, water, and language. Water being a popular one from the repetition of the activity of giving your baby water. Repeating water is such an important word to have your child say. Other words mentioned that played an important role, as you can see here, daycare, conversation, outside, milk, games, blocks, dolls, songs, and walk, all words that play an important part in a healthy child's life. It takes time and effort from parents, caretakers, and the community to give a child a stimulating environment filled with language, rich learning experience to help children meet their milestones. This concludes my audio presentation for my capstone. Today is May 16, 2014. Again, this is Delcy Stanishi. Good night, Pomona.